Blender for Noobs.
Hello, this is Dan Nobles, and welcome to Blender for Noobs. And welcome to this lesson on how to model a pyramid. And if you're following along with the course, Blender 3D Modeling for Beginners, this is lesson 4 of that course. In this lesson, we're going to continue to use the polygonal type of modeling by using the box modeling method, also known as subdivision modeling. So let's get started. In the previous lesson, we created this cube-like structure. So if you created something like this and you wanted to save it, make sure you have it saved. And in order to start with our pyramid, what we can do is we can keep our lighting and everything. We'll just go ahead and select the object and X delete it. So how does one go about creating a pyramid? Well, no one knows quite yet how the ancient Egyptians did it. There's a number of theories out there, but there's also a number of different ways that we can create a pyramid in Blender. So let's start with the most simple way we can create a pyramid. So we need to think about what type of shape the pyramid actually is and what it looks like. Well, we know that the base of a pyramid has 4 sides. It's basically a square. And then those 4 sides come up to a point. So in order to model an object or any object in Blender or any 3D program, what you should be thinking about is when you think about what object you're going to model, you need to think about what type of primitive you need to start out with. So if we do a Shift A and we look at our mesh objects and look at our primitives, we need to find the shape that's closest to the object that we're trying to model. So if we look at these, immediately we look at the cone and we think, that looks kind of like a pyramid. We could probably use that. But the thing about a cone is, if we choose a cone and we scale it up, the cone's base is round. Now we could use this and we can manipulate all these different vertices here. If we tab into edit mode and we choose vertex, select there, and then that's a pretty big pyramid. And if we look at this, we could start moving these vertices around, try to get them so that the base is square, but that's a lot of work. So I'm just going to tab back in object mode, X, delete this. Go back into Shift A, look at our primitives again, and look again and see if there's something closer to what we need. Well, really the cube is going to give us our basic base shape that we need. So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to select cube. Let's move it up where we can see it. And I'm going to tab in edit mode. So our base is okay. However, we have this top that needs to be merged into one. It merged into a point in order to create the pyramid. So we could go into 7 on the numpad, top view, and we could start selecting these vertices here and try to move them over to where we think the center is, but there's an easier way to do it. So I'm just going to use my middle mouse button to dolly along here, and I'm going to choose B for my box select tool, select all these vertices that we need to merge. And we're going to use the merge tool, which is Alt-M on the keyboard. And I'm going to choose to merge at center. So when I do that, it merges all these vertices into one vertex in the center, and we instantly have a pyramid. And then of course you can choose to scale this down or move it down if you want to get a different type of shaped pyramid. So this at its very basic level is a pyramid. And let me move this back into our camera view. Let's choose 3D view. Okay, so there's our camera view. I'm going to select the camera. And I'm going to choose GZZ to dolly in on this a little bit. Okay, so if we did an F12 of this, we have our pyramid there. We still have freestyle selected. I'm going to unselect that or deselect that. And there's our pyramid. So this very, very simple pyramid might be okay, say if we had the camera here and let's say that this was really far away, maybe it was a lot smaller, and it's something in the background that we see, but we're not getting a lot of detail on it. So we could take this object and we could actually take some kind of pyramid looking texture like stones or something and put it on this object, and it might be fine for long distance shots. But like I say, when you get close up with your camera and you try to, get a view of this pyramid, it's just going to look basically like the shape that it is, which is a cube where the top points have been brought together. But that's a very quick way to make a pyramid. But say if we wanted to create a pyramid where we have a little bit more detail in it. Say, for example, we see the actual steps going, steps of stones going along the length of the pyramid. So I'm going to take this pyramid, I'm going to just move it out of the way here. And I'm going to choose Shift A. And again, I'm going to come up to Mesh and choose Cube. And choose 7 Top View. And I'm going to use this cube as the base of my pyramid. And I maybe want to scale it up a little bit. And then scale along the Z. So SZ. Make it a little bit less thick. In fact, if we move over like this, we can probably see it a little bit better. Move it up. SZ. Scale it down. So we could say this is the base of our pyramid. And we'll put it right on our backdrop here. Okay, so this will serve as the base, and what we'll do is we'll duplicate this all the way up so that we'll create the pyramid. But before we do that, we want to think about what we're duplicating. So for example, if I duplicate this, so I'm just going to do a Shift D to duplicate, select off of it, pull it up, and then if I go into 7 Top View, I can scale it down and kind of see where it's smaller, where I need it to be, and set it on top of that. But there's a slight problem here. It's not a very, a huge problem, but it's a bad modeling practice, and I'll show you what it is. And that is, we pull this up and we look at the bottom of it, we have the geometry on the bottom. We're never going to see this geometry. So in other words, if I tab into edit mode and I choose face, this face on the very bottom, if I can select it, we're never going to see this face. So we really don't need that geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and choose X, delete faces. But what I really should have done before I even duplicated it is I should choose this geometry down here. So I'm going to tab back into object mode, select this one, tab into edit mode, and select this face down here, and X delete that face. So now whenever I duplicate this base and reuse it again and again, it's not going to have that extra geometry on the bottom. Now, why would I worry about that? The reason that you want to work this way when you do your modeling is to reduce your polygon count. So for example, if I tab into object mode and I have these two objects here, if I look up here at our status bar, I can see that we have 25 vertices and 16 faces. Now, if I left those two on there right now, then of course I would have had 18 faces. Now, it doesn't seem a big deal because we only have these two objects right now, but as we duplicate these, we're creating more and more geometry. And what happens is when you try to go and render your object and you have too much geometry on there, or excessive geometry that you could have done away with, it's just going to slow down your renders. If you get into animation and do animation, it'll slow down your animation. So you always want to be thinking in the back of your mind how you can reduce the amount of geometry needed. Do it in the simplest way that gets the effect that you want. So I'm just going to take this one now and I'm just going to bring it down here, set it on top of there. And now I can do this again, just do a Shift D duplicate and go into 3 side view, bring this up, go into 7 top view, scale it down. It's kind of hard to see it directly in top view, but something like that. Now, I'm just really eyeballing this, so it's kind of a rough way to do it, but a more precise way to do this is you would do something like go into 7 top view, Shift D, duplicate this, and then when you scale, you would scale precisely. For example, you might say S 0.9 and select off of it, and that way when you bring this up, it's exactly scaled to that that numerical amount you put in. But you'd have to figure out which numerical value you would want to scale by. You would also want to move it up that way. So for example, in 3 side view, and say it was sitting down here, I might want to say GZ.1, and that moves it up that 1 unit there, just to be more precise. So just keep in mind that when you move and scale things, you can do it more precisely in Blender, and it's all according to these units on the grid. So that will give you a more precise object, and that's, of course, the correct way to do it. But just to quickly create our pyramid here, I'm just going to choose this, do Shift D, scale it down a little bit, bring it up, Shift D, just duplicating this, scaling it down a little bit, bring it up, Shift D, scale it down, bring it up. You can do this, several hundred times if you want to, but basically what you're creating here, Shift D, scale it down, is your pyramid. And I moved a lot of these up a little bit too much. So that's what happens when you try to do something very quickly and you're not doing it precisely. You get something that doesn't look quite right. So with that done, I can tab in edit mode, grab this face, and I might want to just bring that up to the very top so it looks kind of interesting there. So now we have, if we look at this pyramid and we have our camera on it right now, we can see that we have a little bit more detail. So we're actually able to get a little bit closer and say, oh, that pyramid actually has some detail to it. It actually has some stone steps of some sort. And also we could put a texture on this as well, so it looks a little bit better. But I'm just going to do an F12 render. So you can see how our pyramid compared to our other plane pyramid looks much better. So that's yet another way to create a pyramid. Well, what if we wanted it even more detailed than this? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to B-box select. Actually, let me go into 7 top view, B-box select this pyramid here, and Shift unselect. I don't want to select the backdrop. And I'm just going to move this one out of the way. So now let's say that we want even more detailed pyramid. So how can you get more detailed than this? Well, if you think about the pyramids of Egypt, what do they actually look like? What are they composed of? Well, they're made up of huge cubes, huge blocks that make up the entire pyramid. Then we can think, well, we need to start out with a cube. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm just going to deselect everything, do a Shift A, go to Mesh, and choose Cube. And this will be the very starting building block of our pyramid, just like the ancient Egyptians did. So I'm going to scale this down about to the size of the pyramid as I would think it might be. So now we have, and I'm just going to zoom in here and make sure that we're on top of this plane here. So this is the very first starting block of our pyramid. And in some theories, it is said that it took the ancient Egyptians like 20 to 25 years to build the main pyramid of Giza. So whether that is true or not, if we take this cube and we start duplicating it and create a base with it, and then we take, keep duplicating them and creating another step base and keep going like that, it's going to take us forever. Maybe not 25 years, but it's going to take us a long time. There is a very much easier way to do it, and I'll show you how to do that. So we have our cube here. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this, but we're going to use arrays. So I'm going to come over here to modifiers, and I'm going to go over modifiers in more detail in a later lesson. But for this particular example, we're going to add modifier, and we're going to choose array. And as soon as you choose array, you'll notice that it's added another cube right next to the one that we had. But we don't want it going off in that direction. We want it to go off in the Y direction. So by default, it's setting at 1 in the X direction. So I'm going to change this to 0. and you can see that took it away. And I'm going to go over to Y, and I'm going to choose 1, and you can see that it's adding it along the Y direction. So now, if I add up the count, or add to the count, you can see that it's adding those cubes along there. But the problem is, we don't see actual cubes, we see just a long line of the cubes because they're butted right up against each other. Well, what we can do is we can choose this and say 1.1, and look at that, it's divided them. It just made them, given them some space between each other. So it's really up to you how much space that you want and how many cubes you want. But I'm just going to bump this up a little bit more, up to 17. Actually, let's make it an even number, 18. Okay. And then the same thing about thinking about the geometry and how much geometry you're using applies to this. In fact, it very much applies to this because you're duplicating this object several times. Notice that our faces are already jumped to 159. They're going to be much higher when we're done. So let's go and look at the bottom of this cube. Tab into edit mode. And maybe an easier way to do this is I'm just going to choose Z for wireframe. That way we can see the underneath. And I'm just going to choose this face and X delete this face. And then I'm going to tab back into object mode and Z back into solid view. And by the way, another way to change those different views is to come down here and you'll see wireframe, solid, texture, rendered. All of this is how you change the different views. Okay, so when we did that, when we took that bottom face off, it took the bottom face off of every one of these duplicates, which is good because now instead of 159 faces, we have 141. But we need a lot more of these blocks. So we could just do a Shift-D, duplicate this array here and move it over, but yet there's another easy way to do it. We can come over here, choose Add Modifier, and add another array. And you'll notice it's doing sort of the same thing. It's adding an array on top of an array. So it's moved it along the X. We don't want to, well, we do want it along the X, but we want it to go the other way. So scroll down here to our new array, and we're going to change this to negative 1.1. And the reason we went to 0.1 is we want that gap between them. So now we can start to bump up this count. So I'm going to go up to 18 just to make it a perfect square. And you'll notice as we have all this added geometry, our faces are continuing to grow very high. Now, one of the problems with this method is we're creating our pyramid here, and we have, you know, if we applied these faces and we have all these cubes here, we have all these faces here that no one will ever see because we'll have cubes on top of them. So that's kind of a flaw in this plan, but this is sort of an easy way to show you how to use the array modifier and how to create the pyramid this way. So once we created our base, we can do our Shift-D to duplicate this and move it up. So we have an exact duplicate of this, but now what we can do is come over to our arrays, and these are different arrays than what we have on the bottom because these are two separate objects. So we can select this top object, and we can change this to maybe 17, and this one to 17. So then if we go into 7 top view, it's offset a little bit, so we can choose G and just move it. And of course, again, you may want to move it precisely using numerical values. But just to quickly do this here, I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay, so now we start to see our pyramid being formed. And in fact, just to make this a lot quicker, I think what I'll do is, let's change this down to 14, because I don't think you want to sit here and watch me create this entire pyramid and take forever doing it. So Shift-D, duplicate that, and go to 3 side views so I can see what I'm doing here. Make sure they're kind of sitting on each other. And as you can see, like I say, you can be a lot more precise doing this, but I'm just going to do this very quickly. So I'm going to knock this down. Let's go down to 9. Okay, 7 top view. Kind of hard to see where the center is here, but I'm just going to guesstimate right there. Shift D, duplicate that one. 3 side view. Move it up. Or if I Control Z undo that, like I said, G, Z, 0.1. Actually not quite where we need it to be because of the size of these. So G, Z, 0.2. I've got it offset too much, but that's okay. So let's choose that, go to our modifiers again. Remember, these are different modifiers than the other ones because it's duplicated. And I'm just going to go down to 4. This be a very cheap pyramid to build for the Egyptians, and not quite as aesthetic either. So then at this point, what you could do is choose Shift A and choose Mesh, choose Cube, bring this up, scale it down, put it as the top of your pyramid. Somehow I got my center point mixed up. Or actually, no, I didn't. I just moved my pyramid over to the left there when I did the array modifier. So I'm just going to G move this into the rough center of the pyramid. 3 side view, bring it down. Okay, so there is a very quick pyramid. As you can guess, you could have spent more time and created the different levels, but when you take a render of this one now, you can see that you do have a lot more detail than even the last one. So you can see as you spend more time working on your model and better techniques, you can create a better model from doing that. So we'll take this model here. I'm just going to B-box select this and Shift deselect that there, and actually somehow got this one in here. See if I can deselect that. Okay. And by the way, I just used the middle mouse button when I B-selected that to deselect. Okay, so I'm just going to move this pyramid over. So with each successive pyramid, we've gotten a little bit better. And of course, when you think about what a pyramid looks like, and you think about these cubes, these stones that would be in here, you could actually model these individual stones. In other words, if we take this one cube and do a Control R, edge loop, roll up on the mouse button or mouse wheel, select off of it, and SY, scale on the Y. Just going to bring that out. Control R, make another edge loop here, make 2 of them. SX, scale on the X. And then if we zoom in and look at it, Control R, make an edge loop here, bring this up, and then go into Vertex Select and Shift Select these outer vertices, and go into 7 top view. Scroll out so we can see where we're at. And I'm just going to do an S scale and scale these inward a little bit. And see, 3 side view. And I'm just going to move them down, just trying to get like a knock off part of the point here. And you'll notice when you do something like that, you can create something that looks more like a stone. I mean, that's a very rough way to do it. Another way to do something like that is you can choose your object here, go to your modifiers, and you could add another modifier. There's a bevel modifier that you could use, and you can see right away what kind of effect that has had on the blocks. Okay, I just made a bit of a mistake, which just goes to show that even though you're supposed to know what you're doing, sometimes you make some bad moves. So what I did is, if I select this here and I have the modifiers, and I was showing how to do this array here, do the bevel modifier. I have my two arrays, and then I have the bevel modifier down here, and I started to change some of these values here. And that would be okay, except what it's trying to do is it's trying to apply these array modifiers first, and then it's trying to do all these bevel functions on top of that. So I guess it's kind of a good thing that I did that, even though it froze up Blender and I had to redo the scene. That's why it probably looks a little bit different to you. But what you should do is apply these or add these modifiers in the correct order. And in this case, you can change the order that they are with the little arrows. So I'm just going to bump this up like so that the bevel modifier is applied first. So really, if you look at this, if I tab into edit mode, it's really applying it to this one cube, and then once it applies that bevel change, then it's applying this array change to all the other pieces. So now if I wanted to, and I'm going to do a quick save just in case I have some problems, but I can look at this. Let me tab back in object mode, and I can go ahead and play with the values here now. So if I look at the width, I can kind of change that and see I have no problem changing the width, and it's going on through. If you were to move this bevel modifier back down and try to change that, it will most likely crash Blender, or at least take a few hours to do what you're trying to tell it to do. So anyway, that's kind of a lesson learned there. So that's one way you can change the shape of your cube. Of course, it's still, it's very clean looking as far as the different shapes. They all look the same. So if you wanted to like make something like the pyramid might look today, and make different stones look like they have, they've worn down in different ways, then of course you'd have a lot of work ahead of you in order to try to model these, the different stones, at least give them enough variation so that they all look different. But that of course would be for very, very close-up work and very detailed work. So now we have, we've done the pyramid three different ways here. We've done our very, very simple method, which is just taking a cube and moving the vertices in. We've done a little bit more complex way so that we have the steps here. And then we have another, even more complex way so that we have the cubes, or the different, you might consider them stones, created separately like this. So that's three methods to think about when you're modeling a pyramid. I'm going to show you one more method. This is more like an advanced method. So you can follow along if you like. I just don't want you to get kind of blown away by doing something like this. The point that I want to make with this is when you're creating something and you're thinking in Blender how you can do something, and we've done this three different ways, and they're fairly, once you get into learning Blender, they're fairly simple ways to consider how to do this. Always think in your mind, is there another way? Can I use some other function that's within Blender to create what I'm trying to create? The reason I'm saying that is because Blender has just a ton of functionality. There's a lot of stuff that can be done with it. So as you learn more and take more and more tutorials and learn different things about the different functions in Blender, then you can start to put the different things together and know the different possibilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a thing called dupliverts, and basically that's just duplicating vertices, and I'll show you what I mean. But first, before we get started, let me look at my pyramid here, and I just want to make sure I go in, tab in edit mode, and choose face select here. I just want to delete this face here, X delete faces, because again, anytime you start duplicating things, you're going to have all that extra geometry duplicated. So tab back in object mode. Let's go ahead and put this back down towards the ground. Okay, so I'm going to choose Shift A, go to Mesh, create a cube, choose S to scale this down quite a bit, and I'm just going to move it up here where we can see it. So while this cube is still selected, I'm going to Shift select our simple pyramid over here, and I'm going to choose Control P, and this will create a parent. So I'm going to set the parent to object, and this makes these two objects parented together. So now I'm going to choose just the pyramid. So make sure your pyramid's selected, and then I'm going to go into object data up here. And you want to scroll down until you see a menu called duplication. So open that up, expand that, and we're going to duplicate the verts. So choose verts. And as soon as you do that, you will see that you have this duplication of these cubes here. And the reason it's doing that is because it's doing exactly what we're telling it to do. We've parented this cube here, and we're actually duplicating the vertices on the pyramid. So if I tab into edit mode and I choose vertices, you can see that we have one here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. So we have 5 of them. And we have our original cube that we created, and then we have the 5 duplications. So I'm going to tab back in object mode, and I'm going to select the cube here, and I'm just going to move this down towards the ground so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we have kind of basically what we have here. We're starting the basic structure of a pyramid. So how can we use this to create more? Well, what we can do is choose this pyramid, and I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to select all and choose W, which is a specials menu, and I'm going to choose subdivide. And as soon as I start subdividing, you can see that it's adding more of the blocks because it's duplicating all these new vertices that I'm creating. So I'm going to choose W, subdivide again, and again you can see more of these blocks created. And we might say, well, this pyramid is looking kind of, the blocks are really too big. So I can come back over here, tab back into object mode, select my cube for the pyramid, and just scale it down. Make these blocks pretty small. And then come back over here to the pyramid, tab into edit mode, and let's do a couple more subdivisions. W subdivide, W subdivide. So now you can see we're getting something that is making a fairly nice pyramid. Now I'm going to tab back into edit mode, object mode. And if we look at our pyramid here, and if I select this pyramid, let me turn on Z so I can see my original cube here, because that's what I need to select. And say we move this up, which is going to move all of those duplicates up. Z back into solid. Now you can see it created this with nothing on the bottom because I removed that bottom face of our original pyramid, which took care of a lot of geometry that would have been created. But as you can see, these individual cubes still have all these bottom faces on it, and we don't need that for the bottom because nobody is ever going to see them. So in order to fix that, I can just tab into edit mode on this cube, choose faces, and delete that bottom face. Tab back into object mode, and as you can see, all these faces on the bottom have been removed. So that just cut down pretty heavily on the geometry that we're creating. Go back into Z wireframe so we can see the cube, make sure we can select it. And while it's selected, let's go ahead and we can move this into place. And I'm just going to move it right beside our simple one here, the parented one. Okay, Z back into solid view. And let's see if we can take this one. I'm just shift selecting these pieces, and I'm going to move this a little bit, just so we can see all our pyramids here. Now, again, this method right here is a little bit more advanced. Just want you to be aware that in Blender, there's always different possibilities on different ways you can do things. So while we have all our pyramids here, we can go back to our other view here, select our camera, choose Control 0, and then we can move our camera around so we can get a view of all our pyramids. GZZ. Move this out a little bit. Actually, I think what I want to do is I want to move the camera around a little bit, so I'm just going to G, move it over here, R, rotate it. Something like that view right there. Do a Control S quick save. So then I'm just going to go to my render settings here and check my settings. I want to look at the resolution, make sure that's the resolution I want. And I'm going to go ahead and uncheck freestyle because remember we used that in our previous render. And just do an F12 to render the scene. And there's our pyramids. Now as you can see, we're not seeing our simple pyramid because that's parented to this one. So in order to fix that, if you want to have that in your scene, just take this pyramid here, Shift D, duplicate it, and I'm just going to move it out like so. And we can move it over here or leave it right next to that other one if we want to. And we can check the settings on this one and just choose none for dupliverts. And do an F12 render. So just looking at our pyramids, you can imagine, as we said, this simple one that we did, if we put a texture on it, it would be nice for faraway views. And then our different successions with pyramids being created with a little bit more complexity. And then the one that we created that's a little bit more advanced, of course, probably in this case the best method to use because it looks closer to the real thing. Now one thing you may notice with this render, it does look a little plain. You have just some sharp shadows going on. The shapes don't really have a good variation of light. But if you set up lighting and you use the Cycles render engine, as we did in my previous course, Blender 3D for Beginners, then you'll see that this scene becomes very much more interesting, much more realistic. But if you didn't take that course and you're interested in rendering something like this in Cycles, don't worry, because in the next lesson, I will be doing the render in Cycles, and also I'll apply just basic lighting and some basic materials to our object. Not to the extent of learning how to use those functions that I did in the beginner's course, but at least it'll give you something to look at to see how your image would render out in Cycles. So in the next lesson, lesson 5, what we're going to do is model sort of like a technical drawing. And if you think of something like a parts drawing that shows an exploded view of the pieces, it's something like that. It's nothing very complex, but it should be interesting and fun to do. So I'll see you in the next lesson.